If you look at Usain Bolt, he runs a 100 meters dash and he consumes roughly about 20 watts per kilo. You look at our robots, they consume about 200 watts, 10 times that. So we're 10 times more inefficient than Usain Bolt. He's running for a gold medal. We're just trying to hover.
Today I'm chatting with Vijay Kumar, a world-renowned robotics expert and dean of the Engineering and Applied Science Department at the University of Pennsylvania. Known for his acclaimed and pioneering work in developing agile, smart, and multi-robot systems, Vijay designs bio-inspired algorithms that let dozens of robots cooperate autonomously, indoors, underground, and in the most extreme conditions. Vijay is the founder of XN Technologies, an advisor to many startups such as TreeSwift, and also serves on the board of We Robotics and O2 Micro. So what makes a swarm smarter than the sum of its bots? How do you transform dozens of palm-sized drones into a ballet-like choreography in uncertain conditions? And where will human-robot teamwork create the next trillion-dollar markets? This is Ben Kaplan with Deep Venture Partners. Our email is deepshow@deepvp.com. Let's go deep. Vijay, when we've chatted before, you've talked about this, where we are in this hype cycle of robotics. What do you mean by the hype cycle, and where are we now in terms of superhuman things, as you would characterize it, that robots can do, and things that humans, even your 2-year-old or 3-year-old grandson, can do better than a robot can do?
Well, first of all, Ben, thank you for having me on this podcast. It's an honor to talk to you. So the question you're asking requires a wrong answer, but I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. So by hype cycle, I mean there are a lot of things today that the tech world tries to publicize as being ready, as being mature, and they try to sell you things. And what I think people may not realize that everything that they're trying to sell you are problems that people have been working on for many decades. To give you an example, self-driving cars. I remember as a graduate student, witnessing the first self-driving car being demonstrated in Germany, in Munich. This was a Mercedes that could navigate an Autobahn at a fairly high speed just using cameras. And you got to think back to the computation back in the 80s, which is not significant, the resources that is, conventional cameras. And it was a really hard problem. And so fast forward to 2025, it's still a hard problem. And there's a reason why while the technology is maturing, there's a reason why many of us are very nervous, even suspicious about decisions the car might make based on what the car sees. So that's an example of a hype, although, folks like Elon Musk has, way back in 2015 said, this is will be ready for prime time in 2016. Well, fast forward to 2025, it's still not there. So that's one example. I think I would also say, we've been predicting lights out factories with industrial robots doing automation going back to the 60s. But you look today and you made this comment about dexterity. I mean, robots are not very dexterous. They're extremely good at performing tasks that they're set up to do where the environment is specifically designed for that particular task, for that particular robot. So in some axes, and perhaps this is what you're alluding to, in some axes, they're superhuman. They can do things because they've been precisely set up to do their one precise task with an extremely high degree of accuracy.
What do you think about just the relationship to the excitement, some would say hype, about artificial intelligence and this idea of, a general agent AI that is more able to operate in the wild, take stimuli that it's not pre-programmed to respond to, and deal with it?
That's an excellent question, Bren. But let me also preface that by my answer by saying that AI too is an old field. It started in the 50s. You probably know this. We've had AI winters, first, second, etc. But this time it's different. Everybody will tell you, and I will also agree with them. This time it's different. I think the paradigm shift, not just in robotics, but in every aspect of our lives, is this shift from what I would call model-based thinking to data-driven thinking. So, if you're doing robotics, chances are you're a STEM major at some point. You learn physics, you learn mathematics. all the physics that you learned was based on laws of motion, right? And so today, if Sir Isaac Newton were to be alive today and wanted to sort of describe to you the laws of gravity, the first, second laws, etc., and of course, Sir Isaac Newton would be equipped with all the modern tools that you and I are used to. He would likely whip out his iPhone, take videos of apples falling from trees, and come up with a completely different way of describing gravity, which would be comparable to the current way we teach physics, which is using these extraordinarily sophisticated tools of calculus. So what I'm trying to say is that we have complicated phenomena in the world that we can describe in two different ways. One is, using your traditional, what I call model-based first principle approaches based on mathematical tools. And the second, also based on mathematical tools, but based purely on measurements and data sets. So what AI has done, and we've really seen an inflection point in this work going back to 2017, 18, 19, with the emergence of these transformer architectures for deep learning, is really ingest large data sets and reason about it based on the context that the system finds itself in. And of course, because we're dealing with internet scale data sets, many of those data sets really have to do with language, with text, and then more recently with images. So that led to large language models, which, in some sense are nothing but this, they exemplify this data-driven approach to figuring out things. And vision language models, which are about vision and language being embedded in the same framework. So really powerful tool for robotics. So while I bemoaned the state of the art in robotics by saying everything has to be set up, the real promise in AI and the real excitement is that conceivably you could gather all possible information, data that you need, and extract from that relevant information to perform a task that you've never performed before. That would be amazing, but that's the excitement, that's the promise. I'll just tell you it hasn't happened yet, but that is the excitement.
Well, and to use your analogy, and that would be fascinating to have Isaac Newton in modern times. That's a fun thought experiment, what he would do. But I would almost describe it as, well, billions of apples falling around the world. And you have the data set of all of those apples. And from that, you could extrapolate similar laws of physics, but it'd be a very different approach to go look at the billions of apples versus the single one.
Exactly. And thank you for making my point for me. But it's not just apples. It's even baseballs being thrown or any kind of projectile or kids playing on the street. So you would assimilate all that information. But I guess the point you're driving to is, if I wanted to describe this, how would I do it? Well, I'd have to have a language for describing trajectories of projectiles. I'd have to have a language to describe the statistics. I'd have to have a language to essentially what we call data science, which is extracting the information from these very large data sets. And then finally, I'd have to have a way of contextualizing what I've just seen to a completely new projectile that, to use another analogy, say Superman were to pick up a car and throw the car away, right? So you'd have to extrapolate in size, scale to sort of, okay, superhuman is probably not the right thing to go, but you get my point. It's a different problem that you and I have never seen before, but understanding how apples fall from trees and a whole bunch of other projectiles are thrown and how what the trajectory is, you should be able to predict.
You have expertise in many areas of robotics, but in particular, you're known for aerial robotics. More commonly, people would probably call them drones. You're known for multi-robot systems, which is interesting, the idea of coordinated robots working together to accomplish a task. Where are we in those areas in our sort of hype cycle versus reality versus, 2030, what is the world going to look like?
Let me start with aerial robots. And I want you to contrast that with self-driving cars. In some sense, if you want a robot to be completely autonomous, disconnected from the external world, that is in terms of internet, human pilots, radio connections, radio connectivity, and so on, you essentially need a self-driving car, except this car flies. So the problem becomes a little more complicated because it's in 3 dimensions. And in some sense, it becomes easier if you're flying high above buildings or any kinds of obstacles. But the minute you fly low to the buildings, low to the ground, that's when the problems get really tricky because you truly have to reason about the 3-dimensionality of the world you're in. The second challenge it has to do with the mechanics of flight. So drones typically refer to these multi-rotor aircrafts, which basically have many rotors that spin fast enough to generate thrusts to counter gravity. Well, it turns out that this is the worst form of locomotion you can imagine. It's not efficient. You end up burning a lot of energy, a lot of power, I should say, just to stay in the air. So it's like imagining us, instead of standing, let's imagine we're always forced to jump in place, do high knees all the time just to stand.
Okay, yeah, you're in a constant personal training workout.
Exactly. You would run out of energy pretty quickly. So the way I like to characterize this, if you look at Usain Bolt, one of the fastest men alive, he runs 100 meters dash, and he consumes roughly about 20 watts per kilo during the 100-meter dash. You look at our robots, they consume about 10 times that. So we're 10 times more inefficient than Usain Bolt. He's running for a gold medal. We're just trying to hover, right? So therein lies a challenge, and that challenge is that in order for you to become autonomous, you have to carry stuff. That stuff includes batteries, it includes processors, GPUs these days, it includes cameras, perhaps LiDARs, and that's one advantage that the self-driving cars have that drones don't have. Self-driving cars don't have to fight gravity. There are other challenges, like pedestrians walking across the street, but at least the size power constraints don't exist. So we try to adopt a very economical way of designing our sensing package, our computational package, so that we put minimal hardware on board to get the same kind of intelligence that you see in self-driving cars. So that's a big challenge, and that's what prevents it from being commonplace today. Although one of our spin-off companies, Exyn Technologies, today makes drones that operate with the kind of 24/7 precision reliability that you expect in industry, and they operate underground in mines, in dark, dusty environments, essentially saving people potentially from dangerous situations, preventing them from entering dangerous situations. So yes, there are drones that exist, but they're not widespread. They have important but niche applications.
The phenomena of so-called swarm intelligence draws inspiration from natural systems. Imagine ant colonies where thousands of tiny ants work together to collectively find the shortest path to available food. Or picture flocks of birds or schools of fish, where lots of individual animals coordinate direction changes rapidly, avoiding predators or sudden obstacles. So why are these natural systems so remarkable? They can grow without a drop in performance, keep functioning even if agents drop out, and adapt to new environments dynamically. Swarm intelligence leverages the wisdom of the crowd, not by making individuals smarter, but by making their collective behavior more adaptive, robust, and efficient than any individual agent alone. Humans wrote a series of rules that are designed to be easy to follow, meaning there's a stop sign, I stop. I get a green light, I go. There's crosswalks. Is the less presence of that in the air an added complication because we can't train against such like specific rules?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Ben, but I will also link it to something we discussed earlier, which is the world for drones is less structured than the world for cars, which in turn is less structured than the world for industrial robots, where you know exactly where everything is. The part comes, stop at precisely the same position and orientation every time, and the robot can go there and expect that part to be there, which is the part that needs to assemble. Cars are a little bit more complicated. As you point out, there could be stop signs. God forbid there's a construction truck that's just pulled in, or pedestrians that have chosen to cross at random times. So those are still issues. So clearly drones have little, that structuring is not there. But on the other hand, there's a lot more open space. So in 3 dimensions, it's generally less cluttered than in 2 dimensions. And then going back to the theme of being structured versus not structured, most self-driving cars, for all of robotaxis, for example, operate in environments that have been pre-mapped. So you know exactly what the roads look like. In fact, you know the 3-dimensional curvature of the roads up and down San Francisco, up the hills, down the hills. All that knowledge is being put to work, which drones might not have, because you turn the building, there's a air pocket, there's a wind tunnel you're entering. You turn the corner and suddenly you're confronted with blinding sunlight, which you don't see before. All of those things we have to deal with. So there's a lot more, I would say, uncertainty in what a drone sees than what a car sees.
What is the next leap that we will need to see in drones or aerial robotics to get to the next level of, I don't know if it's full autonomy, but it's partial autonomy or something else? What is the next leap in understanding or knowledge that we will have to solve?
Well, I think both self-driving cars and drones are trying to get to this sort of, I would say, level 4 autonomy. So level 4 autonomy is you can prescribe a mission, which involves going to places, and it largely is unsupervised. And I think that's where technology is converging. I think the challenge sometimes is, how do you specify it? How do you specify this is what I want you to do? So if you're in a robotaxi, it's actually relatively easy. I need to get to this destination. So that part is less challenging. But let's say I have this problem. I'm in a mine. I want you to go tell me, or you're in a mine, I want you to go tell me if there's any portion of the mine that has collapsed, and look behind every potential collapse site and see if you can see any human beings. And this may involve going through tunnels, these gigantic vertical stopes that are really hard to navigate. But above all, don't inundate me with useless data. Come and tell me when you found something interesting, something useful. So that's sort of the, I would say, near-term goal, near-term being next 2 to 5 years. If I can do that reliably, I think it would be a viable product that people would pay for. And we're getting close to that.
Where are we in terms of like multi-robot systems and that versus, one really amazingly capable robot or multiple robots that all work together?
So let me try to answer that question by using this notion of connected cars, the logical jumping off point. There are 3 paradigms for what I would call collective behaviors. And the simplest paradigm is indeed what you see in connected cars, where cars essentially coordinate. In the case of cars, you want to improve the efficiency, you want to maximize the throughput of your roads, but you could also think about robots, let's say vacuum cleaners cleaning up a large warehouse. So if I have 1 robot, it takes me, let's say 10 hours. If I have 2 robots, if they do the right job, it'll take me 5 hours. If I have 4 robots, it'll take me half of that, 2.5 hours, and so on. So that's coordination. That's making sure that you know where your neighbors are and you talk to each other and you cover complementary areas. And that's actually the simplest form of coordination. So that largely relies on knowing where your neighbors are. And as you pointed out, in cars, being connected to them, exchanging information. The tougher problems involve sort of what I call cooperation. So as human beings, we don't just coordinate, we also cooperate. And the simplest example I can think of is if you and I are in a room, we have to rearrange the furniture. There's a big sofa. I can't do it by myself.
Okay, we're going to lift it together. We're each going to take a side and we're going to move it over.
Exactly. So, and for that, I need you to cooperate with me, and you need me to cooperate with you. That relationship is a lot more complicated, And I want you, our listeners, to sort of think about the information exchange that needs to happen even after they've established the willingness to cooperate. It's complicated. And if you look at ants, and we've studied how ants do this, it's actually remarkably sophisticated. And one of the things we notice is that when a single ant cannot move a morsel of food, she goes out and recruits other ants, or they go out and recruit other ants. And if that morsel is too big, you'll see that as you increase the number of ants, the success of the task, if I were to plot it on the y-axis, will suddenly jump up, right? One ant, not enough. Two ants, not enough. Three ants. And they keep recruiting until they hit that threshold and they jump up. So that's cooperation. Same thing. You and I might not be able to pick up furniture. We go out and get our buddy in to help with the same task. Then even more sophisticated is what I would call collaboration, where the word collaborate refers to people coming together with skill sets that are different. So if I want to, for example, perform a task, or let's say write a book, and I want to have another author work with me, I'm not going to pick somebody who looks exactly like me. I want someone to have a diverse perspective, somebody who comes at it from a completely different angle.
Use our couch example. We might be needing to move this couch, but it's very dirty. We need to clean it. As we get over there, that's someone else. And oh, by the way, there's a repair. We need to sew the repair and not have that. And we might call in a few people so that we can get our apartment set up.
Yeah, and where I was going with this to connect it back to drones is, if you look at construction sites, a lot of the stuff happens on the ground. And so imagine there are no workers, just robots doing the thing. But what about the crane that has to lower things down? So if that were a robot, and imagine a drone, then you essentially have to have something that's different from the collection of robots on the ground, and collaboration between the aerial robot and the ground robot. So that is true collaboration. So again, we go from coordination, which I think we understand quite a bit about, to cooperation, which we sort of know, but it's really hard to get that to work properly, to collaboration, which is even harder. Even mathematically modeling it and coming up with appropriate strategies has been a little elusive. Not to say people are not making progress, but it is more challenging.
And what's going to happen first? Are we going to see, super robots that are single entity that just have I guess the way to describe it is a Swiss Army knife of skills and abilities and autonomy? Or are we going to see less super robots, but more coordinated efforts to accomplish things by having these swarms of robots? What will we see first?
So we're already seeing examples of the latter. So if you look at, so there's a company called Kiva Systems, which got acquired by Amazon. And today, all fulfillment centers have these robots that are basically modular. They're small. They can't do a whole heck of a lot. But what they can do is pick up pallets, objects, and bring it to a human operator. So you've got this big warehouse with tens or hundreds of robots that are all coordinating, moving around, getting stuff to the operator. And the one thing they cannot do, the operator does, which is pick up the object from the robot and put it in a box. And by the way, there are attempts to automate that as well, but that's actually pretty hard. It's the manipulation tasks that always get you in the end. But the robots are doing most of the work, and they're coordinating. Now, in your analogy, I could have gotten a super robot which would trundle along and go to the storage retrieval system, pick up an object, and then trundle back and then put it in the box. But no, we figured out that the economical way to do this, what makes business sense, is to decouple these actions and modularize the robots. And then the unit cost of the hardware that you need to automate this also comes down dramatically because of that.
And the other similar question I have for you is industrial robotics and the state of the art there versus in the wild applications that are not these controlled environments. Where are we going to see more, changes first? This sort of the controlled setup and just the ability to sort of do more in controlled situations, or in the wild situations? That's your drone in the mine that's able to look around the corner and see if there's someone there.
Let me just tell you where I think there's the maximum room for impact. So in the wild, I just gave you one example of the mining example, which you have to have that kind of capability. We still have a couple of airplanes that are at the bottom of some ocean floor that we haven't found. Why? Because we don't have that capability to explore in the wild. Elon Musk talks about going to Mars. Well, we're not going to go to Mars unless we have that ability to operate in the wild. But the biggest driver for this, unfortunately, is the military. So there will come a point. So you used to be in World War II. If I have more tanks than you, I win, and you wouldn't fight the war. So there's going to come a natural point where my robots are better than your robots. I have more of them. That's checkmate. So I think there is, and I hate to say this, but I think this is there's an instinct in all of us to try to, not you and me, but nations to fight wars. And that's a big commercial driver. And I'll just say one last thing about this connection between military and civilian life, which is if you look at the most successful robot today, it's made by iRobot. This is the vacuum cleaner. Well, iRobot was for a long time a company that was trying to help the military deploy robots in Afghanistan. And they stumbled upon this application, and it's just a wonderful application. Nobody likes to do vacuuming, and it's a very simple idea. So simple that many people won't even call it a robot. But those are the kinds of unexpected, serendipitous discoveries that we might make as we think about robots functioning in the wild.
Well, and interesting to think of the sources and drivers of innovation. You're dean of the engineering school. Do you have concerns about the current state of, sort of pure research funding now, which seems to be under a bit of a threat? Though, to the analogy you just made, there are other sources such as defense and others that lead to unexpected innovations in other ways, some very military oriented and some, to per your example, not. What do you think about our investments in robotics, generally speaking, and then just generally the university environment now? Are you worried?
We're in the midst of an existential crisis. And I tend not to exaggerate. I just told you I'm not fond of hype. But if you look at innovation in the US and other places, yes, it is true that we have visionaries like Steve Jobs that come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, you need lots and lots of R&D to make those ideas real. And if I find a successful idea that works in a commercial product that's adding value to society, I'm almost confident that I can trace that back to some idea that germinated in a university laboratory. So the one thing the U.S. has is this amazing system of R&D, and also getting the best talent to work on that R&D with that R&D infrastructure. And I worry that that's under attack now. And there's maybe another point you were trying to make. I also worry that independent of the funding, the crisis I was telling you about, I worry that as innovators, we don't pay enough attention to doing it responsibly. So in our school, we've just launched this campaign on responsible innovation, the idea that you innovate because you have a grand challenge, a problem to solve, a societal issue to address, and not just because you can do it. And the one thing that I've been guilty of myself, we started working on drones because we thought it would be cool. And we can't afford to do that. And that's because technology is moving so quickly. The barrier to learning how to use it is dropping dramatically. And so we really have to think through the consequences of what we do. And, as educators, we have to make sure our students understand that.
Do you feel that, currently in academia, does the best technology that might have a commercial application, does it ultimately get out, it makes it, people see value, there's spin-offs, technology's licensed, money's raised, ventures are funded? I'm a venture capitalist, so we look for some of these things. Do you think that is the case? Or do you think that a lot of things with potential get trapped in academia? It's on the shelf because there wasn't the right business people teamed up, people didn't see the application. Maybe it's a scientist that is thinking about pure research doesn't think about commercial applications at all, or doesn't have a team around them that could? Is there stuff that we're missing out on that is there that could certainly build companies, but also help change the world?
Well, Ben, I think you know this problem better than most people do. But if we really had an efficient way of unlocking all the intellectual property that's in universities and efficiently push it out to the market, we wouldn't be in this quandary today. The problem is this lab to market pipeline is extremely inefficient. And part of the problem is that we in academia have been a bit conservative in how we push out our technology. The reality is there's a healthy, needs to be a healthy mix between curiosity-driven research. People do things because they want to do it and they want to explore, versus people like you who are shopping the laboratories and saying, guys, you're doing this, but have you thought about doing this other thing, this thing that's slightly tangential but could have great impact? So we don't have enough avenues for that back and forth to happen. And we can explore why that's not the case. But I do believe that that's a central problem in our ecosystem.
Collectively, if we could show the value of that more, maybe that would also justify more investment in curiosity-driven research. We should do that. We are willing to do that because this is the foundation that all of this is built on. If we could see, more examples and all of the players saw more, return on investment of that research that might need to take 20 years prior to reap something, in the future.
I totally agree. And I'll just say that I see this change happening in my own institution now. 20 years ago, we used to hire faculty so that they could write better papers. Now we look at what impact they would have and, what kind of technology they would develop, how that would find its way into society. So this actually becomes an evaluation criterion. We also don't penalize faculty to working together in groups, something that was the case 20 years ago. This sounds strange, but it's true.
You wanted something that was like identifiable as this is your innovation. It's Vijay's, and you actually don't want 5 other people that have different skills working together. That was the way it used to be.
Exactly. But and people come to academia because they want to collaborate. They want to work with people who have skill sets that are complementary to theirs. And that we're fostering, at least in our institution. And so we no longer look at, is this just the work of Professor X? Or God forbid, did that person work with Professor Y? So those questions are no longer being asked. So we're changing. And I think it's important this change to occur so that we're more relevant to societal needs.
What about this idea of what, in your opinion, is the best approach now to collaboration?
My answer might surprise you. I have a very old-fashioned answer to this. I do think, and the environment during COVID really heightened this observation of mine, which is, in order for true collaboration to happen, you need to have synergistic interactions between people. So the more you co-locate people with diverse interests and skill sets, the more chances you have of getting a breakthrough. And so now if I look at the talent pool we attract, they come because they want to be next to so-and-so. So we have a great effort, for example, in messenger RNA-based technologies, which originated at Penn. And we're attracting chemical engineers, material scientists who want to be here because they see that a lot of that innovation was done here. And they want to be in the same building.
Final thing I want to end on with you is just applications of everything we've described in different forms of robotics. Where do you think we'll see impact in areas? We've already talked certainly about, I think we talked about mining, we talked about search and rescue, we talked about industrial applications, but what about things like agriculture, logistics and supply chain, healthcare, space exploration? Where will all this take us? Where do you think, other disciplines where robotics will have a large impact in the not too distant future?
I'm so glad you mentioned agriculture. It's an area which is a sweet spot for us. And I do a lot of work on precision agriculture, trying to get actually drones to monitor plants to figure out how to treat them on an individual basis. So it's an important area. It's also an area that I think the world needs innovation. As if you look at the challenges we have with the shortage of land, with climate change, and so on, you need dramatically new ways of harvesting crops, of cultivating and harvesting crops. Just I think a sobering statistic is that if you look at the total market in robotics today, it's on the order of, I would say, $40 to $50 billion. So not a lot. And the growth rate is not substantial, right? So it is hard to extrapolate from the current base, which is mostly industrial robotics and a few service robotics applications. The one thing I will say is, rather than try to predict the areas where you see a lot of innovation, I might pick countries with a lot of innovation. China is amazing. And one of the reasons they're amazing is because of the source of talent. They have huge amounts of talent. And so every one of our self-driving car companies is competing with a company in China that has 10, 20 times the number of people there. So I think one thing I believe we'll see is the next big breakthroughs may come in commercialization, that is, may come in China. I will reiterate what I said before. I think the defense industry will see important advances. The Ukraine-Russia war, that conflict saw a lot of drone technology being developed. So military and science fiction are big drivers for advances. This sounds odd, but it's a funny combination, right? So military settings inspire science fiction writers who then, believe it or not, inspire academics. And so that is also a virtuous cycle. So I would link advances to geographical areas like China, or to these themes, science fiction plus military applications. Not to say there won't be commercial benefits for civilians like you and me, but that's where the growth will come from.
Where do you think in the near term, we have many investors in our audience, are just areas to explore, to pay attention to, sectors, subsectors where you think are interesting from an investment perspective now, today?
Yeah, I think in the U.S., you mentioned agriculture, and again, I should have mentioned that earlier, but that's an area where the labor shortage, the fact that we have these large farms, 20,000 acre orchards, and we don't have the human power to manage these facilities. So that, combined with the fact that we do, and of course the lack of immigration policies, and there's a political issue, but I don't see that changing anytime soon. So it's not like we're going to have a flood of labor from outside. So I think the drivers are ripe for agriculture, and I do think if I were to, actually our lab works on agriculture, precision agriculture, and I do think there's a big potential impact there.
What a fascinating conversation. I could honestly talk with you all day about this.
Thank you for allowing me to talk to you on Deep. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you to Vijay Kumar, a pioneer in the field of robotics and Dean of the Engineering and Applied Science Department at the University of Pennsylvania. Be sure to subscribe for the latest episodes. You can message us at deepshow@deepvp.com. This episode has been brought to you by Deep Venture Partners, an emerging venture capital fund in Silicon Valley. Get show notes, transcripts, helpful links, and more at deepvp.com.